June 6, 1944. Omaha Beach, Normandy. The morning arrives wrapped in smoke and the peculiar metallic taste that fear produces. Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann, 352nd Infantry Division, crouches in a concrete pillbox overlooking the beach and watches the first wave of American soldiers emerge from landing craft into water that runs red within seconds. Hartmann has fought on the Eastern Front, survived Stalingrad's frozen hell, earned the Iron Cross defending positions against Soviet human wave attacks. He knows infantry combat's brutal mathematics. He knows that defenders with prepared positions and interlocking fields of fire should slaughter attackers emerging from surf with no cover. The doctrine is sound. The Germans have the advantage. Yet something is wrong. The Americans advancing through the killing zone are firing as they move, not the bolt-action rifles Hartmann expects, but semi-automatic weapons producing a sustained volume of fire that no infantry rifle should be capable of generating. 8 rounds discharged in seconds. Reload in under 3 seconds with a distinctive metallic ping as the en-bloc clip ejects. 8 more rounds. The sound is relentless, mechanical, impossible. Hartmann's MG-42 gunner collapses, hit by fire from a soldier 200 yards distant who never stopped moving. The Americans are supposed to be untested, inexperienced, equipped with weapons inferior to German engineering. They are not supposed to be advancing under fire, while delivering suppressive fire that rivals machine gun rates. Hartmann realizes, with the clarity that mortal danger produces, that everything Wehrmacht intelligence has told them about American infantry capabilities is catastrophically wrong. The M1 Garand emerged from bureaucratic persistence rather than revolutionary inspiration. John Cantius Garand, a Canadian-born firearms designer working at Springfield Armory since 1919, spent 17 years developing a semi-automatic rifle that could meet U.S. Army requirements. Accurate to 500 yards, reliable in extreme conditions, simple enough for conscript soldiers to maintain, and capable of sustained fire rates that would give American infantry decisive tactical advantage. The design journey was torturous. Prototypes rejected for excessive weight, complexity, or unreliability, until Garand refined the gas-operated rotating bolt system that would define modern infantry rifles. By 1936, the M1 was adopted as standard issue, making the United States the only nation to equip its entire infantry with semi-automatic rifles before World War II began. The weapon's specifications seemed unremarkable: 30 Zer-6 caliber, 8-round en-bloc clip, weighing 9.5 pounds, effective range of 440 yards. German engineers examining captured M1s early in the North Africa campaign filed reports noting the rifle's adequate but unexceptional performance characteristics. What those reports failed to capture was the weapon's operational reality. An American infantryman with an M1 could fire aimed shots 3 times faster than a German soldier with a Karabiner 98K bolt-action rifle. In close-quarters combat, that rate of fire advantage was tactically decisive. In sustained firefights, it was psychologically devastating. American production capacity transformed the M1 from adequate design into strategic weapon through sheer scale. Springfield Armory and Winchester Repeating Arms manufactured approximately 5.4 million M1 rifles between 1936 and 1945. Every American infantryman in Europe carried one. Every rifle underwent quality control testing that ensured 98% reliability, a figure that German ordnance officers struggling with Kriegsmarine weapon production under Allied bombing found almost incomprehensible. The M1 represented American industrial warfare's essential advantage, not necessarily superior design, but superior manufacturing capacity producing weapons of consistent quality at scales that overwhelmed enemy forces through numerical superiority. Training doctrine amplified the weapon's effectiveness. American infantry drills emphasized marksmanship combined with aggressive fire and maneuver tactics that exploited the M1's semi-automatic capability. Soldiers learned to maintain suppressive fire while advancing, a tactical impossibility with bolt-action rifles that required soldiers to stop, aim, fire, manually cycle the bolt, then repeat. The M1 allowed continuous fire during movement, fundamentally altering infantry combat's tempo and giving American forces initiative even when attacking prepared defensive positions. German infantry doctrine, refined through decades of tactical evolution and 5 years of combat experience, rested on foundational assumptions about infantry weapons capabilities and limitations. The Wehrmacht's standard rifle, the Karabiner 98K, was a bolt-action weapon descended from designs that had served Germany since 1898. It was accurate, reliable, and required a trained soldier to fire 15 aimed rounds per minute under ideal conditions, dropping to 8 rounds per minute under combat stress. German infantry tactics compensated for this rate of fire limitation through combined arms integration. Machine guns provided suppressive fire, rifle squads maneuvered under that suppression, and victory came through coordination rather than individual firepower. This doctrine had proved devastatingly effective against Soviet, British, and French forces equipped with similar bolt-action rifles. But American infantry, arriving in North Africa in November 1942, operated under different tactical logic. A standard American rifle squad carried 9 M1 Garands capable of collective fire rates exceeding 250 rounds per minute, approaching the sustained fire rate of a German MG-34 machine gun. This wasn't suppressive fire in the traditional sense. It was aimed fire delivered at volumes that German doctrine hadn't anticipated infantry rifles could achieve. The first major engagement revealing this tactical disparity occurred at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, where German forces initially routed inexperienced American units through superior tactics and veteran leadership. But German after-action reports noted a disturbing pattern. American soldiers, even when retreating, maintained fire discipline and volume that inflicted disproportionate casualties on advancing German infantry. Lieutenant Otto Carius, commanding a Tiger tank, observed American infantry behavior that violated his understanding of infantry combat. They fired while moving. They fired while falling back. They fired from positions we thought we had suppressed. The volume was incessant. It was not the fire of panicked troops. It was systematic, almost mechanical. By the time American forces landed in Sicily in July 1943, Wehrmacht intelligence had distributed tactical bulletins warning that American infantry possessed semi-automatic rifles, providing significant firepower advantage. Recommended counter-tactics emphasized maximizing engagement distances, where German rifle accuracy might compensate for American rate of fire, and aggressive use of machine guns and mortars to suppress American positions before they could establish fire superiority. These recommendations were tactically sound. They were also increasingly difficult to implement as Germany's material situation deteriorated, and American industrial capacity continued producing M1s, ammunition, and replacement troops at rates that made attrition warfare mathematically unwinnable for the Wehrmacht. The first significant shattering of German infantry confidence occurred not in dramatic set-piece battles, but in the accumulated small unit engagements where tactical advantages compounded into strategic despair. During the Italian campaign's brutal mountain warfare, where terrain negated armor and air support, reducing combat to infantry versus infantry in conditions favoring defenders, American rifle squads demonstrated the M1's decisive impact. German defensive positions in the Gustav Line, meticulously prepared with interlocking fields of fire and supported by artillery, should have been nearly impregnable against frontal assault. Yet American infantry, attacking uphill through terrain that channeled their advance into killing zones, sustained casualty rates and maintained offensive pressure that German defenders found incomprehensible. Unteroffizier Franz Weber, defending Monte Cassino in early 1944, described the experience in letters that military censors never intercepted because he carried them out after being wounded. We had position, elevation, prepared defenses. They had to advance up the mountain under fire. Every tactical principle said we would destroy them, but the Americans never stopped firing. When we exposed ourselves to shoot, 3 or 4 rifles would target our position immediately. Our best marksman was killed by someone he never saw, firing from cover while moving. It was not heroic. It was mechanical, industrial, unstoppable. The psychological impact manifested in German casualty statistics that Wehrmacht command initially attributed to poor morale or inadequate training. German infantry units in Italy suffered head and upper torso wounds at rates 20% higher than on the Eastern Front, suggesting that American semi-automatic fire was more accurate and sustained than Soviet full automatic fire from submachine guns. The difference lay in training and weapon design. Soviet PPSH-41 submachine guns delivered high-volume fire with limited accuracy, beyond 50 meters. The M1 Garand delivered high-volume fire with accuracy to 400 meters. American soldiers weren't spraying bullets wildly. They were firing aimed shots at rates that bolt-action rifles couldn't match. The tactical adaptation required by German infantry was profound and demoralizing. Experienced Wehrmacht soldiers learned to minimize exposure time, fire from concealment, and avoid sustained firefights where American rate of fire advantage was decisive. But this defensive mentality surrendered initiative, allowed Americans to control engagement tempo, and created psychological conditions where German infantry, even when holding superior positions, felt themselves at disadvantage. The M1 had accomplished what no propaganda campaign could achieve. It made veteran German soldiers, many with years of combat experience, hesitant to engage American infantry in circumstances where tactical doctrine said they should prevail. The psychological transformation occurred simultaneously across opposing armies, manifesting in ways that transcended simple confidence or fear. For American infantrymen like Private First Class Robert Leckie, carrying an M1 Garand through the hedgerows of Normandy, the weapon became extension of will, a tool that responded instantly to intention without the mechanical delay that bolt-action rifles imposed. Leckie described the psychological advantage in memoirs written decades after the war. You saw movement. You fired. The rifle responded immediately. You fired again and again. There was no break in the cycle, no pause while you manually operated the action. The weapon kept pace with your perception of threat. That responsiveness created confidence that transcended the individual firefight. You believed you could win because your weapon never made you wait. This confidence manifested in tactical aggressiveness that doctrine alone couldn't produce. American infantry attacked German positions with frequency and determination that Wehrmacht officers found tactically irrational, until they understood that American soldiers possessed firepower advantages that made aggressive tactics less suicidal than German experience suggested. A German infantry squad, equipped with 5 Karabiner 98K rifles, 2 MP-40 submachine guns, and 1 MG-42 machine gun, theoretically possessed adequate firepower to repel attack. But if the MG-42 was destroyed or suppressed, a priority target for American fire, the remaining German soldiers faced attackers who could deliver collective fire rates the defenders couldn't match. German frontline reports from Normandy, compiled by Wehrmacht intelligence officers attempting to understand why veteran units were being ground down by supposedly inexperienced American divisions, revealed patterns that senior command found disturbing. German infantry were consistently losing small unit engagements even when holding advantageous positions. Casualty ratios, which heavily favored defenders in previous campaigns, were approaching parity or worse. Most significantly, German soldiers were displaying reluctance to engage in firefights where American infantry could establish fire superiority, a psychological shift that indicated not cowardice, but rational assessment that German weapons placed them at decided disadvantage. Oberst Friedrich von der Heide, commanding the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment in Normandy, documented this morale erosion with clinical precision. My paratroopers are among the Wehrmacht's elite. They have training, experience, and ideological commitment, yet they express concern about engaging American rifle squads in circumstances where we should have tactical advantage. They describe the Americans' sustained fire as unnatural, not the cyclic fire of machine guns they've learned to identify and suppress, but rapid semi-automatic fire from multiple positions simultaneously. It affects their willingness to expose themselves, to maintain aggressive postures, to execute tactics that require accepting calculated risk. The subtrauma of industrial and logistical warfare revealed itself not in rifle design, but in the systems supporting the M1's battlefield effectiveness. American ordnance doctrine emphasized not just weapon production, but the entire logistics chain, ensuring that rifles remained functional through extended combat operations. Each M1 Garand was manufactured with tolerances allowing parts interchangeability. Any component from any rifle could be swapped into any other M1 without custom fitting. This standardization, achieved through precision manufacturing at scale, meant that battlefield repairs required only replacement parts, not gunsmiths. American armory trucks accompanying frontline units carried standardized parts kits, allowing repair of common malfunctions within minutes. The contrast with German small arms logistics was stark and strategically consequential. The Wehrmacht fielded multiple rifle types, Karabiner 98K, Gewehr 43 semi-automatics in limited numbers, captured Soviet and French weapons issued to rear echelon and occupation troops, each requiring different ammunition, different parts, different maintenance procedures. German ordnance officers struggling to supply armies across multiple fronts faced nightmare scenarios. Units in France using different weapons than units in Italy, both different from Eastern Front troops, all requiring separate logistics streams that Allied bombing was systematically disrupting. American ammunition production compounded German disadvantages. The .30-06 cartridge that the M1 fired was manufactured at approximately 12 million rounds daily by 1944, enough to supply every American infantryman in Europe with 100 rounds weekly, regardless of combat intensity. German 7.92 57mm Mauser production, hampered by raw material shortages and factory dispersal to avoid bombing, struggled to meet demand. By late 1944, German infantry units were receiving ammunition allocations insufficient for sustained combat, forcing tactical restrictions on when soldiers could fire, restrictions that American infantry, never constrained by ammunition scarcity, didn't face. The maintenance simplicity differential proved equally significant. The M1 Garand could be field stripped and cleaned by minimally trained soldiers in under 3 minutes. The rifle's gas-operated action was sufficiently robust that it functioned reliably with minimal maintenance. Combat reports documented M1s firing thousands of rounds without cleaning in conditions ranging from Normandy's mud to Bastogna's frozen forests. German Karabiner 98Ks, while reliable, required more frequent maintenance and were more susceptible to fouling in extreme conditions. The Gewehr 43 semi-automatic rifles that Germany produced in limited numbers, approximately 400,000 compared to 5.4 million M1s, suffered reliability problems that made them unpopular with troops who preferred bolt-action reliability over semi-automatic capability, when the semi-automatic weapon might fail at critical moments. The ethical weight that infantry combat imposed manifested differently than strategic bombing's distant death or tank warfare's mechanized violence. Infantry combat was intimate. Soldiers saw the men they killed, heard their screams, sometimes found letters or photographs on bodies they searched. The M1 Garand, for all its mechanical efficiency, didn't sanitize this intimacy but rather intensified it through rapid fire capability that allowed individual soldiers to kill multiple enemies in seconds. Private Eugene Sledge, fighting in the Pacific but articulating experiences shared by European theater veterans, described the moral complexity of rapid-fire capability. The M1 allowed you to kill efficiently, almost reflexively. You saw movement, fired, and watched a man die, then fired again and killed another. The weapon's semi-automatic action eliminated the pause that bolt-action rifles imposed. That brief moment where you had to physically work the action, a moment where consciousness might intrude. The M1's efficiency was both blessing and curse. It kept you alive. It also made killing easier than it should be. German infantry faced parallel moral reckoning. Lancer, common German soldiers, writing in diaries and letters that military censors never saw, recovered decades later from battlefield locations or captured document archives, expressed disturbing patterns: resentment toward Wehrmacht leadership that had equipped them with inferior weapons while claiming German technical superiority, anger at propaganda that had insisted American soldiers were weak and poorly armed, and most troublingly, a growing sense that they were sacrificing themselves in defense of regime whose promises of victory were obvious lies contradicted by material reality. Gefreiter Heinrich Böll, who would survive the war and become Nobel Prize-winning author, wrote with bitter clarity about the moral collapse that inadequate equipment accelerated. We are told we fight for homeland, for civilization, for survival of our people, but we fight with rifles that make us reload while the enemy keeps shooting. We fight without adequate ammunition while American supply trucks follow their infantry, like they're on training exercises. The lie isn't that the cause is just, though that too is lie. The lie is that we can win. They want us to die for propaganda while they know the mathematics make victory impossible. The moral weight was this: soldiers on both sides killed and died in service of causes they might question, using weapons whose effectiveness or inadequacy was determined by industrial capacity beyond their control, in a conflict where individual courage couldn't overcome systemic advantages or disadvantages created by national production capabilities. The escalation toward technological and tactical climax occurred during the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last major offensive in the West, launched December 16, 1944, through the Ardennes forest in conditions that negated Allied air superiority and should have favored German tactical doctrine. the Wehrmacht committed its last strategic reserves, 28 divisions including elite SS Panzer units, 250,000 men, 2,400 tanks and assault guns, supported by Luftwaffe squadrons scraping together fuel for final operations. The initial assault achieved complete surprise, broke through American lines held by inexperienced divisions, and created penetration threatening Allied supply lines extending to Antwerp. For 72 hours, German commanders believed they might achieve operational success that would split Allied armies and force negotiated peace. But the offensive stalled within a week, not primarily because of American armor or air power, both were hampered by weather, but because American infantry, outnumbered and surrounded in critical road junctions like Bastogne, maintained defensive cohesion through small unit firefights where the M1 Garand's rate of fire provided decisive advantage. German infantry, attacking through frozen forests in conditions that should have favored infiltration and close assault, discovered that American defensive positions could deliver sustained fire that stopped attacks before German soldiers could close to grenade range. Lieutenant Lyle Buch's platoon, defending Lanzerath Ridge on the offensive's first day, exemplified this tactical dynamic. 18 American soldiers with M1 Garands and one .50 caliber machine gun held position against the entire 1st SS Panzer Division's reconnaissance battalion, approximately 500 elite German paratroopers, for an entire day. The Americans fired an estimated 8,000 rounds, killed or wounded an estimated 100 Germans, and delayed the SS Division's advance by 18 critical hours. Buch's after-action account emphasized that the defense succeeded primarily because his soldiers could maintain fire rates that suppressed German assault attempts. Every time they tried to advance, we put so much fire downrange that they had to take cover. The M1 let us shoot fast enough that even when we were outnumbered 20-1, they couldn't concentrate force to overrun us. German casualties during the Bulge offensive exceeded American casualties, approximately 100,000 German versus 80,000 American, inverting the typical mathematics where attackers suffered higher losses than defenders. Post-battle analysis attributed this partly to American artillery and air power once weather cleared, but frontline reports emphasized that German infantry had consistently lost small unit engagements even when tactical circumstances favored them, with M1 firepower cited as primary factor. The convergence of victory and system collapse occurred in early 1945 as Allied armies crossed the Rhine and advanced into Germany's industrial heartland. American infantry, now veteran units with year or more of combat experience, had refined tactics that maximized the M1's advantages: aggressive patrolling, immediate response to contact with overwhelming firepower, and fire and maneuver techniques that kept German defenders suppressed while assault elements advanced. The rifle had evolved from weapon to tactical doctrine. American infantry combat was built around the assumption that riflemen could deliver suppressive fire while moving, an assumption that would have been tactical fantasy with bolt-action weapons. German resistance, though fierce in isolated instances, increasingly reflected an army whose cohesion was disintegrating under cumulative weight of material disadvantage. Wehrmacht units defending the Ruhr pocket in March-April 1945 were equipped with weapons scavenged from throughout German-occupied Europe: Italian Carcanos, French Lebels, Soviet Mosins, obsolete German rifles from WWI reserves. Ammunition was rationed. Training for replacement troops had been reduced to 2 weeks, insufficient to master even basic infantry skills, much less integrate into veteran units. Most significantly, soldiers understood they fought for a regime that had already lost, defending territory that would inevitably be conquered, dying for objectives that rational calculation couldn't justify. The contrast with American logistics was almost obscene. U.S. supply dumps in France contained millions of M1 rifles in reserve, enough to replace every rifle in the European theater multiple times over. Ammunition was unlimited. Replacement troops arrived with 4 to 6 months of training, fully equipped, integrated into units through replacement depot systems designed to maintain unit cohesion. The material asymmetry was so extreme that it rendered tactical excellence nearly irrelevant. German units, even when well-led and motivated, couldn't overcome supply deficiencies that left them fighting with inadequate weapons, insufficient ammunition, and no realistic hope of reinforcement. The personal stories emerging from this period revealed the human cost of systemic collapse. 19-year-old German conscripts, issued rifles from Austro-Hungarian WWI stocks, faced American infantry squads with M1s, backed by unlimited artillery support, air superiority, and replacement systems that made American casualties strategically irrelevant. The young Germans died defending villages that had no military significance, following orders from officers who knew the war was lost, but continued operations because Wehrmacht discipline demanded obedience until official surrender. The Americans who killed them carried rifles that symbolized industrial modernity, weapons that worked every time, backed by systems that ensured unlimited supplies, produced by a nation whose industrial capacity made victory mathematically certain. The preparation for final accounting occurred across multiple dimensions as war in Europe approached its inevitable conclusion. American ordnance officers compiled operational data demonstrating the M1's effectiveness. Reliability rates exceeding 98%, failure rates so low they barely registered in statistical analysis. Maintenance requirements minimal compared to every other infantry rifle fielded during the war. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army had fought from Normandy to Czechoslovakia, made his assessment characteristically blunt. The M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised. The statement was hyperbole. Tanks and artillery had greater strategic impact, but captured essential truth about infantry combat's evolved nature. Semi-automatic rifles had fundamentally altered small unit tactics in ways that couldn't be reversed. German military analysis conducted by officers awaiting war crimes tribunals or already in Allied custody revealed institutional recognition of how thoroughly German infantry doctrine had been outmatched by American material superiority. General Major Gerhard Engel, former adjutant to Hitler, wrote in interrogation reports that Wehrmacht leadership had understood since 1943 that American small arms superiority, combined with unlimited ammunition and air support, made sustained defensive operations mathematically unwinnable. We could win tactical victories. We could not win the war. The Americans could afford losses that would break our army. They could replace destroyed equipment faster than we could destroy it. Their infantry had weapons that made our soldiers reluctant to engage in circumstances where tactical doctrine said we should prevail. The preparation for post-war doctrine was already underway while combat continued. U.S. Army Ordnance Board studies analyzed the M1's success and began development of successor weapons incorporating lessons learned. The emphasis on semi-automatic fire, individual soldier firepower, and reliability would dominate American small arms development through subsequent decades, leading directly to the M14 and eventually the M16. The M1 Garand, for all its success, would be replaced by weapons offering selective fire and detachable magazines, but those successors would be built on doctrinal foundations the M1 established. For the soldiers who had carried M1s through North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany, the weapon was simply the rifle, the tool they had trained with, maintained obsessively, and depended upon when circumstances reduced survival to immediate firefight dynamics. They didn't think in terms of tactical revolution or doctrinal transformation. They knew the M1 was reliable, that it fired as fast as they could pull the trigger, and that it worked when their lives depended on its functioning. That practical knowledge would define their relationship with the weapon for the rest of their lives. The direct confrontation between legacy assessment and combat reality occurred in the immediate post-war period, when military historians, ordnance experts, and tactical analysts attempted to quantify the M1 Garand's contribution to Allied victory. The studies produced divergent conclusions, reflecting the difficulty of isolating single weapon systems' impact within total war's complexity. Operational research teams analyzing casualty data found that American infantry armed with M1s suffered lower casualty rates than British infantry armed with Lee Enfield bolt-action rifles when both engaged similar German defensive positions, suggesting the M1 provided survivability advantage. But determining whether this resulted from weapon superiority, tactical doctrine differences, or American artillery and air support superiority proved methodologically impossible. The German perspective offered clearer assessment precisely because German soldiers had faced both Soviet forces equipped with semi-automatic rifles, SVT-40 issued in limited numbers, and American forces with M1s as standard issue. German combat reports consistently rated American rifle fire as more dangerous than Soviet, attributing this to American training emphasizing marksmanship and fire discipline rather than volume. The M1's semi-automatic capability, combined with American training doctrine, created synergy where the weapon's mechanical advantages were maximized through soldier competence, a combination that neither Soviet semi-automatic rifles, hampered by inadequate training and quality control issues, nor British bolt-action rifles, limited by mechanical fire rate, could match. The decisive evidence came not from casualty statistics but from tactical behavior. German infantry in the war's final months consistently avoided engaging American rifle squads in circumstances where Wehrmacht doctrine said they should attack. This behavioral shift, experienced soldiers making tactical decisions contrary to established doctrine, revealed that ground-level reality had diverged from institutional assumptions. German soldiers weren't refusing to fight. They were rationally assessing that their weapons placed them at sufficient disadvantage, that doctrine-mandated attacks would result in casualties disproportionate to tactical gains achieved. The M1's ultimate vindication came from adoption patterns. Post-war armies studying Wettertou's lessons nearly universally transitioned to semi-automatic or selective fire rifles. The Soviet SKS, the Belgian FNFL, the German G3, and eventually the American M14 and M16 all reflected doctrinal consensus that infantry rifles must provide semi-automatic or automatic fire capability. The bolt-action rifle, which had dominated infantry combat for 50 years, was tactically obsolete. The M1 Garand hadn't merely contributed to Allied victory, it had redefined what infantry rifles needed to be. The apex of understanding arrived not through tactical analysis, but through personal testimony from soldiers who had experienced the weapon's impact across years of combat. Audie Murphy, the most decorated American soldier of W1 with medals including the Medal of Honor, was asked decades after the war what single factor had most contributed to American infantry success. His answer was characteristically direct. The M1 rifle. It worked. It fired fast. You could depend on it. Everything else, tactics, training, courage, mattered. But if your rifle jams when someone's shooting at you, nothing else matters. The M1 didn't jam. That reliability, mechanical functioning under conditions that would disable more complex weapons, represented engineering achievement whose significance transcended specifications. The M1 operated in Normandy's mud, the Ardennes' frozen forests, Italy's dust, and the Rhine's rain. It functioned when clogged with dirt, when frozen, when inadequately maintained by exhausted soldiers who had no time for proper cleaning. This durability wasn't accident, but design philosophy. John Garand had prioritized reliability over theoretical performance, creating weapon that functioned adequately in all conditions rather than optimally in ideal conditions. German veterans, interviewed decades later for oral history projects, offered perspective that only former enemies could provide. They described American infantry combat with terminology that recurred across hundreds of interviews: overwhelming firepower, relentless fire, continuous shooting. The M1 had created psychological impact that transcended its mechanical capabilities. German soldiers had been conditioned to fight enemies armed with comparable weapons. Encountering enemy with decisive firepower advantage had produced psychological dislocation that affected tactical performance even among veteran troops. The convergence of these perspectives revealed the weapon's deepest impact. The M1 Garand had altered infantry combat's fundamental dynamics by proving that individual soldier firepower could be increased dramatically through mechanical design without sacrificing reliability. This was the tactical revolution that subsequent generations would take for granted, but which, in 1944, represented profound shift in how armies conceptualized infantry weapons. The rifle wasn't just tool for killing, it was system for projecting individual soldiers' will onto battlefield at speeds and volumes that previous generations of infantry couldn't achieve. That capability, multiplied across millions of soldiers, sustained through years of combat, backed by industrial system that ensured unlimited ammunition and replacement weapons, had contributed decisively to destroying the Wehrmacht's capacity for sustained resistance. The ordinary rifle had proven extraordinary through the simple expedient of working perfectly when everything depended on its functioning. The moral and strategic revelation that emerged from the M1 Garand's history transcended simple narratives of technological superiority, determining military outcomes. The rifle's success revealed deeper truths about industrial warfare's nature, that material advantages, consistently applied across entire armies over extended campaigns, could overcome tactical excellence and individual courage. German soldiers were not inferior. Many were veterans with combat experience exceeding their American opponents, but they fought with weapons that placed them at systematic disadvantage in the small unit engagements where infantry combat was ultimately decided. This realization carried uncomfortable implications for how nations understood military power. Traditional military thinking emphasized training, leadership, tactics, and fighting spirit as decisive factors. The M1 story suggested that industrial capacity, ability to design, manufacture, and supply superior weapons at scale, mattered more than any of those traditional factors. American infantry weren't inherently braver or better trained than German infantry. They simply had better rifles, backed by unlimited ammunition, supported by logistics systems that ensured weapons remained functional, all produced by industrial economy that Germany couldn't match even before strategic bombing degraded German production capacity. The German perspective added tragic dimension to this realization. German soldiers had fought courageously with inadequate weapons, sustained by ideological indoctrination and military discipline, in service of regime engaged in genocide and wars of aggression. Their individual courage couldn't redeem the cause they served, yet neither did the evil cause invalidate the reality of their suffering and sacrifice. German infantrymen froze in inadequate uniforms, starved on insufficient rations, and died from wounds that better medical care might have treated, all while fighting with weapons inferior to their enemies. The moral complexity was irresolvable. They were simultaneously victims of a system that expended them callously, and perpetrators of that system's crimes. American soldiers faced parallel complexity. They had fought for demonstrably just cause, defeating fascism, while incinerating cities, killing enemy soldiers who posed no threat beyond following orders, and participating in industrial slaughter that reduced human beings to tactical problems requiring mechanical solutions. The M1 Garand had made them more effective killers. Whether that effectiveness was moral triumph or moral tragedy depended on perspective that couldn't be universalized. The rifle had helped win necessary war. It had also made killing easier, more efficient, more industrial. Both statements were true. Neither canceled the other. 75 years after the last M1 Garand fired in combat during World War II, approximately 4 million rifles survive in various conditions, some maintained in museums as historical artifacts, others still fired by collectors and competitive shooters, many stored in warehouses as military surplus. The rifle remains functional, mechanically sound, testament to design philosophy prioritizing durability and reliability over complexity. Soldiers who carried M1s into combat, now in their late 90s if still alive, speak of the weapon with terminology bordering on reverence. The rifle that never let you down, the weapon that brought me home, the best rifle ever made. The assessments are subjective but reflect genuine experience. The M1 worked when everything depended on its working. The tactical legacy proved equally durable. Every modern military rifle incorporates lessons the M1 established: semi-automatic or automatic fire, reliable gas-operated actions, emphasis on maintainability, and parts interchangeability. The bolt-action rifle, which had dominated infantry combat from the 1880s through 1940s, was relegated to specialized sniper applications. The M1 Garand hadn't merely contributed to winning one war. It had established doctrinal template that defined infantry weapons development for subsequent generations. But the human legacy resists simple summary. The rifle killed hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of enemy soldiers. It helped defeat Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, contributed to ending Holocaust and preventing Nazi victory. It also made industrial killing more efficient, reduced combat to mechanical operations where moral questioning was subordinated to tactical necessity, and symbolized warfare's evolution toward technological systems, where individual human agency became increasingly irrelevant compared to industrial capacity. General Patton's assessment, the greatest battle implement ever devised, captured military truth, but elided moral complexity. The M1 was an extraordinarily effective weapon that helped achieve necessary victory. It was also a tool for industrial killing on massive scale. Both assessments are accurate. Neither is complete without the other. What endures is this: an apparently ordinary rifle, distinguished primarily by mechanical reliability and industrial-scale production, altered infantry combat's fundamental dynamics by proving that individual firepower could be increased dramatically without sacrificing dependability. It arrived as standard-issue weapon for citizen soldiers. It departed having helped defeat the Wehrmacht and established doctrinal foundations for modern infantry combat. The cost was measured in millions dead, enemy and ally, soldier and civilian, guilty and innocent. The victory was real. So was the price. The rifle that made German infantry tremble had trembled the world.